This is Lansing Online News Radio. You're listening to LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. I am Bonnie Bucqueroux, soon to be joined by my co-host Bill Castanier, and we're going to give you a bit of a warning this evening. I understand there's some inclement weather out there, and we may be interrupted periodically by weather updates. I came through quite a nasty storm on Mason's side of things on my way into the studio tonight. Bill, you said you didn't run into any rain at all?
No, North Lansing, just clouds. You could tell there's a thunderstorm moving around our city, but it didn't hit us.
Well, and there is a very nasty storm down in Oklahoma, Moores, Oklahoma, which was hit in 1999 by an F5 tornado, the highest category that you can get. It is the highest winds ever recorded on Earth, they think, that occurred during that Category 5 F5 tornado in 99. It appears there was another mile-wide tornado that hit the same town again, and unfortunately this time it's hit one elementary school, probably two, and a hospital. The one elementary school is apparently in quite bad shape, and there are efforts to free as many as 75 children who may be trapped in that elementary school.
Wow, what the parents are going through has got to be incredible.
And I don't know, they were, the last news report that I had heard before I left the house was that they were keeping the parents a half mile or so away, and I can imagine the parents want to go in there and start trying to dig literally with their hands to be able to dig down into the rubble, but I suppose it is best left to the professionals who know how to do that without causing more chaos and damage.
And you wonder how far they have to come in from.
I know, that's the other
people that
concern.
do that, that know what they're doing, are not probably there.
Well, yeah, that's another problem. I never thought about that. I mean, you don't know how long it's going to take for, the heavy equipment to be able to get on scene to try to free some of those kids. So we will probably not have updates this hour, but I certainly hope we don't face weather like that here. Upcoming in the next, in Lansing, however, we're not going to be here on Monday night, Memorial Day. And Bill, you did want to mention that there is something coming up, the Tourist in Your Own Hometown.
Tourist in Your Own Hometown is an annual event. It's free. There's hundreds of sites to visit. You really get into everything free. And buses take you to and from and all around the city. And
have you done it?
I have done it once.
Yeah.
There is so many people now.
Really?
I was talking to someone just this week about, I think I'd consider doing 2 days now instead of the 1 day because there's that many people.
What kind of things do you see?
Well, the museums, of course.
Okay.
All have special events, but you get to see things, for example, you don't ever get to see, like the water conditioning plant on Cedar Street is never open to the public.
Oh, really?
And inside it there are 3 gorgeous WPA murals.
Oh, I heard about that.
They are amazing, and no one ever sees them. And
so this is Saturday?
Yes, Saturday, June 1st.
So they do, is that the same day as the chili cook-off or no?
That's Friday.
Oh.
I'm pretty sure that's the Friday night, but not positive.
Okay, all right.
I don't think they try to do it on the same day.
I've heard about those murals.
They are very interesting. I don't remember, there's 2 of them on going up these very long staircase, and one on each side. One is about the positive force of water, the other is the negative force of water.
Really?
Yeah, floods and things. And then at the very top is a Pollock mural, not Jackson, but his younger brother, Charlie, which is still, he was an important artist.
Was he?
Oh, yes.
I knew a lot about Jackson Pollock. I know.
Yeah, and Pollock was an MSU professor, the younger Pollock.
Oh, really?
Especially during the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Back when I lived in Jackson, Michigan, I used to sign some of my artworks by the Jackson Pollock because it was close enough.
But these are these sturdy murals that you've come to think of as the working class mural.
The sort of almost Stalin-esque, aren't they?
Oh, they are.
They look like that.
These things are gorgeous.
Wow.
And the building itself on the inside looks like a 1913 space movie.
Wow.
It's really strange.
Well, so I'm going to have to get, will they let you video?
Yeah, oh sure,
Oh,
absolutely.
cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be great.
But see, that's just one example of something you'll never see except once a year.
See, I think about the fact that I've never taken the tour at the Capitol, that kind of thing. I mean, I just...
It's the only Saturday that the state capitol is open.
Oh, is it really?
All year.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know that.
Oh,
The only time that you can get in the state capitol is on a Saturday for a tour.
Some of us got locked out on a Thursday.
Yeah. See, they're not going to be locking anybody out this time.
Some of us worked through the ACLU and have a lawsuit about that.
And then the History Society which we talk about often because I'm on their board. We're going to have an event open, or our exhibit opening that day called Lansing Eats. It's the history of
Yeah.
eating in Lansing, from catching your own fish to the most modern restaurants.
Now, did you end up with getting the menus you had hoped to?
We got not as many as we'd like,
Yeah.
and especially ones for restaurants going back into the 40s and 50s. These menus just don't seem to be available. But we've got enough menus that's important aspect of the exhibit. But we've got some interesting signs from the 40s and 50s with prices on them from restaurants.
Oh, yeah.
Dagwood's Bar, 40-cent hamburger, things like that.
Wow.
40-cent drafts.
Wow, yeah.
I mean, we've got a lot of interesting things, and I think people will come away going. One of the things a theme that emerges, and you don't even have to hit people over the head with it, is the restaurant industry, the food industry is the history of immigration.
Oh, it is. Yeah,
Very much.
absolutely.
And I asked one restaurant owner, well, it was at Coral Gables, and it's Mr. Vanis, and I asked him why there weren't other ethnic groups. He said, "Have you ever eaten their food?"
Well, that's why you don't
English.
see a whole string of British restaurants.
No, you're never going to see it. That's what he was referring to. Italian,
Haggis,
Lebanese, yeah.
Like Scottish.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Pretty obvious answer, but it was funny to get it out of him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I set myself up on that one.
Well, I mean, Lithuanian cooking, which is what I
A
grew
chain
up
of
with.
Lithuanian restaurants.
None of them survived past 35. Their hearts gave out. They're just clogged with all the sour cream and butter and all the rest of it. Yeah.
You don't see many Polish restaurants,
No.
except in Bay City.
Well, in Detroit.
In
You
Detroit,
can see a
right?
couple out there by Hamtramck. Yeah, yeah. And in Chicago, you'll see more of them.
Oh, absolutely. A bigger city.
Yeah,
And
bigger
there's
city.
neighborhoods, and Bay City has a Polish neighborhood.
Yeah. Yeah, I think actually I've
We
been to that restaurant.
we had a Polish neighborhood here. We still do over by St. Casimir's on would be the south side.
Yeah. Well, those neighborhoods have pretty much dissipated. The kind of strict
Yeah.
ethnic neighborhoods. I grew up in Cleveland in a Lithuanian enclave that was next to the Polish enclave. And I mean, when you grow up in that kind of where ethnicity is the determining factor in who you are and who you're allowed to associate with, it's such a constricted, strange lifestyle that it's very hard to explain to people who didn't grow up in that kind of milieu.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I grew up Catholic, and when I grew up, you weren't supposed to associate with Protestants.
Right. Oh, yeah.
That was a given.
And we were atheists, so nobody associated with them.
And nothing in common.
Yeah.
With
All the
anyone.
kids on the block were unable to play with me because
Yeah.
their parents said not a chance.
They wanted to beat you up.
Yes, exactly. I just hung out in my backyard all by myself. Good thing I didn't care much, I guess. One of those. Yeah, it's going to be interesting though. I can't. Wait, now where will that exhibit be located?
It's at the Historical Society's building on the corner of North Washington and Oakland, right on the corner.
Yeah, I've been there for the other
Right,
one with the
right.
high school memories.
The high school memories.
It's a nice little nook there that you're in.
It is, and again, we just had a fundraiser at the English Inn where we had about 100 people, which was amazing.
Wow,
And it was
excellent.
expensive fundraiser,
Huh?
but Mayor Bonero said the city needs a museum.
It certainly does.
The story's not being told, and we can tell every time we go after items, for example, the restaurant items, they've disappeared. I mean, you might be able to buy some on eBay. That's where most
Oh, never
America's
thought of it.
history is on eBay.
Well, see, I'm going to be teaching an honors seminar this fall called MSU Eats. And the honor students who will take part in that are going to be doing things like documenting their grandmother or, some family member's favorite recipe before it disappears. So often the last generation that did that kind of cooking, it's a pinch of this rather than a teaspoon of that. So
A little bit of bacon grease.
Yes, you've got to see what's in it in order to be able to do it. So food is important.
Now, when will that course be?
It's going to start in September. Oh, in August, yeah. It's a seminar, so it's a weekly class. And they're going to
We
have
could
their own video
arrange.
gear.
We could arrange a special tour.
Oh, wonderful! Yeah,
I mean, anytime.
yeah.
Because by appointment, we could do that.
And we're going to take them to the special collections at MSU, which has hundreds of community cookbooks. They're fascinating to look through. If you ever want something for things like there was in the Great Depression, there are Ritz crackers. You could make a mock apple pie out of Ritz crackers, and
I
it
had
tasted
one.
like apples when you couldn't afford apples.
A woman named Shirley Sliker donated that collection to him.
Yeah.
She amassed an amazing collection.
Quite amazing.
And between MSU and University of Michigan has an amazing cook
They do.
about eating and cooking collection.
Michigan
The
really.
two together are the best in the world.
I know. Almost too bad they don't combine them. They're just fantastic.
And that was politics.
I'll bet it was. Yes,
And that's
indeed.
politics we won't talk about here, but it was serious politics.
Well, one other issue that we wanted to talk about before we introduce our guest tonight, and our guest tonight is going to be Lance Forsberg, and I sort of previewed it on Facebook talking about the fact that Lance will be, unfortunately, In less than 2 weeks, headed into the federal penitentiary to serve 3 years on a marijuana charge related to Michigan's medical marijuana law. So you're going to want to stay tuned for that. But I did want to also say, Bill, that we have been coming up on this issue of the sort of head-to-head battle going on between the Capital City Airport and the Michigan Flyer bus system. The Michigan Flyer just secured a new grant, and they've had one in the past that has also been sort of a source of controversy and concern on the part of the airport. The airport is concerned that they will lose customers to Detroit and lose customers to other through the Michigan Flyer, and so they don't want that grant to come here to the city of Michigan, city of Lansing. And I'm kind of concerned that I think that the Flyer is a wonderful thing.
Oh, I do too. And what they want to do is expand their daily trips between Lansing and Ann Arbor,
Yeah.
and then of course Metro. But a lot of people are now taking that between Lansing and Ann Arbor just to get between the two cities. It has nothing to do with an airport.
Right. Ann Arbor's such a cool town. It's fun to go down there. A lot of people have friends in both places. It's easier than driving. Those highways are so clogged to get there anyhow.
And the arguments are kind of interesting to watch. Certainly, the airport has the heavyweights, the people in the community that are on their board that everyone knows about, who can pull a lot of power with them.
Right.
And Michigan Flyer doesn't. It's owned by Indian Trails, and they don't have a highfalutin board of directors that can come to bat for them. But I think they've made some pretty good case that, and they've gotten into an attack mode for self-protection. Michigan Flyer. They've answered the things about, well, how reliable are these flights going from Lansing to Metro? About 25% of the time not.
Wow.
Canceled or late or something like that. And they're using federal figures, and they don't believe that they are losing money. People that are going to Metro Detroit are going there anyway.
Right.
They will drive themselves.
And they will, yes.
They're not going to.
All they're doing is enriching the parking down there.
Right. They're not going to make the choice of going to the Lansing airport, or they'll go to Grand Rapids or Flint.
I'm seeing more people that I know going to those other airports.
Yes, me too.
Yeah.
And again, I think a lot of it's reliability and flights, of course.
Well, and the planes keep getting smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
I mean, I look for the rubber band now. I mean, they're that tiny nowadays, so I get a little nervous. I was taking one of those puddle jumpers back to the Lansing airport. This was many years ago. And the pilot, was behind a curtain. They didn't even have a door.
Right. No security.
Right?
That's right. No
First
security.
of all, they had to get the heavy set lady to move to the middle aisle, right? That always makes me nervous.
I have been on that too, like that.
And then I heard the co-pilot say to the pilot, "Oh, it did it again!" And something went wrong with the plane, and they had to go back to the. I walked off the plane, and I said to my husband, "Come take me." I don't like those little planes; they make me a little too nervous.
I don't either. And I mean, one of the things that really bothers me about this argument is the airport is playing. They're the innocent victim, and they get first a lot of subsidy.
Sure.
Plus tax dollars.
Right.
So to throw stones it doesn't make sense to me.
Oh, and I love the way the Flyer has Wi-Fi. You can sit there and work on your laptop. They're nice, plush little.
And they have a 98% on time. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it is.
On the routes they take.
I like the idea of substituting the bus. I think you ought to have those kinds of choices.
I think you ought to have every choice available.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most communities do. The bigger communities across the United States, you can do those kinds of things. So it's in a. Really, it has to be approved by the Tri-County Regional Planning Commission.
Oh.
And that's a political group. Carol Wood's the head of that, and she's a supporter of the airport. But that doesn't mean she can stop it. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
How quickly do you think this will play out?
A couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's got to be because
it has to because of the federal grant.
Yeah.
It'll go somewhere else.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. One would think that we would like to have that coming into our community.
Yeah, and I know that Michigan Flyer will expand their operation in Lansing.
I think it's a great little addition to the community. It's certainly been nice for me. I've always enjoyed taking it.
I've known a lot of college students going both ways.
Yes, yeah, it's really handy for them at Michigan State. Well, you're listening to LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. And we're going to be joined now by Lance Forsberg. Lance, greetings. Good to see you. I met Lance yesterday, and Lance is in the unfortunate position of how many days do you have before you have to surrender yourself to the federal facility?
Basically about 8 days.
8 days. And so you have to say goodbye to everybody and goodbye to your family. And how did this happened? Michigan passed a medical marijuana law. I'm assuming that you decided that was a business you thought would be a good business to get into. I mean, most businesses, quite honestly, the sooner you get into them, you sort of lock up your niche. You want to be one of the first people that takes advantage of a new opportunity. How did this happen where you got caught in this net between the federal government and the state?
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. There was definitely some motives with being a new industry, looking at the pioneer barons of the turn of the century
Yeah.
and some of the history of Lansing itself. There's always been a opportunity, pristine time to make hay when the sun shines, so to speak. But my motives really derive from severely injuring my back in a farm accident. I bulged a disc terribly. I collapsed my rib cage and sternum. Just messing around with farm equipment, a hydraulic arm went funny and
Oh,
it heaved when I hoed, and basically, long story short, it stretched my body out to a point that it really couldn't handle. So the abridged version being I was in a lot of pain and I was taking steroids and muscle relaxers, painkillers, and anti-inflammatories, and just feeling like a walking robot, basically. So a year later, the medical marijuana law passed, and being as I grew up as a land developer and in the farm industry, and then also framing homes, and for a period of time mixing chemicals, it seemed like a natural fit for me.
mhm.
Um, Trying to purchase medication was very expensive, and so I decided to try and grow my own. Then I'd at least know the quality and what was in it, so to speak. And so I started a small garden in my home. Um, I soon came to the realization that trying to quote unquote have a corn crop in your basement isn't exactly kosher. Trying to farm in a Michigan basement with molds and mildews and all kinds of obstacles to overcome. I heard of an opportunity at a light commercial facility where I could be the contractor to build some of the basic necessities, put insulation in, contain areas, uh, set some air conditioners, hang some lights, and basically build a system for people revolving around my farm experience. And so I knew that rooms had to be calibrated to a certain temperature
Yeah.
range. Light and chemicals need to be exhausted. Anything that's off-gassing or any of the things you introduce into the environment has to have a way out. So airflow became a necessity. So basically, it just kind of perpetuated where there's just always more work to do. And the idea being, if I worked enough and built enough of these facilities for caregivers, I could have one of my own.
Right.
Uh, it just made sense to me logically to take this out of the residential home and put it in a light commercial facility. We're talking about better security, cheaper bills with three-phase electric, a containable environment, and most importantly, a place I could walk away from. Still have some semblance of life and a household that wasn't something that was growing black mildew on the walls, so to speak. A lot of water, a lot of things to calibrate and keep in control. Anyways, this went on for about 8 months, and the people that had rented out the light commercial facility to these several different caregivers had contacted the local police, and they gave their okay and blessing. Three lawyers drafted up papers saying that this complies with state law. Everybody's doing everything they can in compliance with state law, and in that political atmosphere of 2010. It just seemed like it was not a big deal.
Right. I think there was that feeling after the law went in because it was very specific in saying you shall not prosecute anybody.
Correct, absolutely. There was a lot of civil liberties that were being exercised and what seemed like a veil of protection.
Right.
There was no federal presence at that time. There was nobody coming in and kicking in doors at that time. You didn't hear anything about any of the atrocities that have been committed in the last few years.
It's really been stepping up under
It
the
has.
Obama administration. I am very surprised. The reason I live about a mile or a little bit more away from where your facility had been.
Okay.
And I knew there was a problem the day that the helicopters came over my house.
Right.
All of a sudden, it was like this major siege. One of my neighbors called me and said, "What the heck is going on? Is there some sort of terrorist attack down there by the gas stations and the highway or something?" And I mean, that was the time that all of a sudden your facility then became the target of this federal raid.
Correct. Yes. Basically, it's not admitted to through prosecution that helicopters were used, but the video footage, you can hear them clearly in the background, and
Why
people
are they
saw
so
them.
touchy about that and they don't want to admit it? I tried to get a hold of the U.S. Attorney. I'd report for Lansing Online News and I was trying to get answers. And, I used to train police, so I thought I had a fairly decent relationship with some of these people, but there was a real clampdown to giving out any information. Did you ever find out why there was such a lockdown on the info?
The only thing I can figure is just the simple fact that they're abusing their privileges. They're playing with new toys and a new atmosphere and spending lots of money to do it and not being accountable by anyone.
Here's my theory. I was around at the time that and working in that field when the ATF made the mistake of going into Waco as a training exercise. And that turned out to be the biggest debacle ever. And what happens is that when these agencies do these things as training exercises, they bring in all these assets. And you see the helicopters and all the infrared, all this latest techniques and toys. And I think they were using this as some sort of training exercise. I could never get them to admit that to me over the
Absolutely.
telephone. But it seemed like such overkill.
Definitely.
Were there local police officers involved in the raid?
No, they superseded the local municipalities, did not even contact the police chief whom we talked to or they had talked to.
They kind of cut them out, didn't
Yeah, they absolutely did. The prosecutor was very upset for the county because he was not notified, and they basically just self-empowered, basically militant law to come in and do as they please. That's the way I look at least.
Now, this was a facility on Jolly Road.
Correct.
And how many people were involved? Were you the owner of the facility, or were you renting from the facility? What was the relationship among all the people involved?
Basically, it was recommended by lawyers to, uh, just to back up a little bit, at that period in time, real estate was tanking.
Ah,
There was a lot of empty buildings sitting and a lot of people losing major assets hand over fist because nobody was really in the buying mode. The owner of these facilities was approached by several prominent business people in the Lansing area, and it was said that this would be allowed to do to rent to these people, and then basically, long story short, sublease back if they wanted to include someone else, or basically just keep the rooms separate.
okay.
60 to 72 plants, however it's argued. No more than 60 is the practice they went by. But the problem was federal agents, they lumped 7 buildings together to get the plant count that they needed.
That was the big issue, wasn't it? You were the last I had heard, you had 29 plants in your name? Is that all?
Actually, none were even in my name. I was in the process of moving to that
I
facility.
see.
So it was 7 different caregivers. And of those caregivers, most of them, 3 or 4 of them at least, had not even met each other. But they got us with a conspiracy charge.
That's the trick, isn't it?
It is. It's just a free rein to say and do as they want once a conspiracy is involved. Conspiracy to commit crime.
The RICO laws,
RICO.
when I saw them come in, I was very concerned. The argument at the time by the people who were pushing them was that, well, of course, they will only be limited to mafia kingpins. That was how those laws were sold. But when you read the statute, there wasn't anything in there that said, we're only going to use these against mafia. You know what happens once these laws get on the book? Ambitious prosecutors and U.S. attorneys and other people involved really find creative ways of applying these laws in ways that
Absolutely.
would stun people.
One of the things that amazes me is it seems it depends obviously on the prosecutor.
Yes.
Yes.
Across the country. So the laws aren't being applied uniformly.
No.
Depending where you are, and Grand Rapids federal prosecutor is pretty aggressive.
Yes, very much. Very much.
Which jurisdiction were you?
It was Western Michigan
Western Michigan,
District.
yeah.
Is a woman? Is she?
Yes.
Yeah, federal prosecutor. I've read about her. She seemed to want to make her name in this for some reason.
And everybody's got a job to do. It just was unfortunate that they went out of their way to do their job in a fashion that seemed to be very contradictory to what was supposedly a 66% vote by Michigan
Yes.
citizens.
And they were very specific. The law is really, it was very general, and some people would consider it overbroad and a little bit vague, which made it harder to enforce in some ways. But the reality was they seemed very clear that they didn't want people like you prosecuted under the law. Do you have any idea how you ever came to the attention of federal agents?
I think because everyone was so transparent about it, it drew the attention of anyone that had an ear open. This was not something that was hidden. It was not under a veil of secrecy. There was a federal tax ID that was filed.
Right.
We
You
all
notified people that this is what you were doing.
correct, and let the local municipalities know. There was some discretion with school system being close by. The law federally is that you cannot be within 1,000 foot of a school system. Now, building to building, nothing was 1,000 feet. Street corner to or property corner to property corner, it became a different story.
Oh, so it depends on how it was measured.
Yes, exactly.
So you're down to that kind of fine line
Yes,
distinctions.
absolutely.
And nobody was cutting anybody a break at this point.
No, no, it all just came crashing down so quick. Basically, I was teaching a grow class the evening that we were raided, and as I was driving back to my home, I was pulled over and detained on the side of the road for about 7 hours. I got out to
7 hours?
yeah, they had to raid the facility and then pull an open-ended warrant at about 1:48 a.m. for my home after I willingly gave them my license and said, yeah, I live just down the street. And so after not finding what they were looking for, quote unquote, at the facility, they decided to come in my home and kind of do a quick check too, so to speak. It's just ironic because when I first met the federal agent, I walked up to him with my hand out and shook his hand and said, I've been looking forward to meeting with you guys, let's go on a tour. And I just started getting questions fired at me right and left. And I guess once one says, I need a lawyer 3 times in a row, they can no longer ask you questions without a lawyer present. So after the third time of saying, I think I need a lawyer here, they stopped asking me questions, and I just sat in the car in the middle of December and,
Wow.
just waited for them to take me to my house and then continue the raid.
Now, were you expecting at first that this would be something that would be easily cleared up?
Yes, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Uh, the thing was the political atmosphere changed very quickly when Bill Schuette and Snyder were elected. Bill Schuette has a long
Ah.
history of being a proponent against marijuana in general. He brought a very top-down perspective with him to his appointed seat as Attorney General for Michigan.
I understand his wife works in the pharmaceutical industry. A lot of people have raised that connection that the pharmaceutical industry is perhaps not all that happy with seeing marijuana. I mean, the research that's coming out lately shows it really is a wonder drug. I mean, it's absolutely stunning. I was reading over the weekend, there was a study by 2 Harvard professors, and seemed counterintuitive because you would think that, the reputation for marijuana is that the minute that you take any, you want to go on these blind munchies, and you just assume that everybody would be obese and instead they found out that it actually works that your waistlines are slimmer on people who use marijuana, and it reduces their blood sugar. The hormones don't act in the same way, and it may be a protective against diabetes. I mean, it seems like every week, now that they're finally able to do some research on marijuana, they're finding all these health benefits.
Well, I was actually in Sparrow Hospital just before that period in time, and I saw a poster on the second floor, just in general public access, that said Medical Marijuana Seminar Symposium.
At Sparrow?
At Sparrow
Oh,
Hospital.
wow. I had no
Wow.
idea.
Yeah. So I showed up that day and I walked right in. No one stopped me, and I sat down, and Dr. Syed from Ferris Pharmacology, I believe it was introducing some new products they were coming out with. Sativex is one of them, a THC-based compound. They said they'd identified 86 chemical compounds and 2 subcategories of THC. And so with all these different cannabinoids, CBDs as they're called, and THCs, there was a broad spectrum of potential for medical use.
And many of them really don't even get people high anymore.
Right, correct. CBDs, in fact, are counteractive to THC. They will bring the high down, so to speak, or take the high away. The chemical components of CBDs perhaps could be the most revolutionary part of the medicine. It's not something I completely understand, I won't lie. However, the CBDs, basically the different chemical compounds have sedative effect, or they have anti-inflammatory
Yeah.
reliefs. They're just finding a lot of these things out now that there's actual studies happening that aren't funded by people who are looking for a certain answer.
Right, right.
And
But
so
it really just wasn't any research done for a long time. There was just a lot of,
very biased.
scaremongering that was going
Yes.
on. And now that they're actually taking a look at it, it has extraordinary capabilities to deal with. Did it help with your back?
Absolutely, absolutely. The thing that I found was to generically say this is all one thing is not the case. Each strain possesses different chemical compounds. And so, two issues I found immediately off the bat. I like to tell people that, when gin was made in a bathtub, people went blind.
Right.
And so when you're trying to grow quote unquote medical marijuana in a moldy basement with salt-based, petroleum-based compounds, it's not getting necessarily the essence of the plant that one needs to get from it. And so there is definitely a quality control issue. That's where I thought that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there was an era when the government was spraying paraquat on the marijuana plants in Mexico, and people were smoking it. They were still harvesting it and smoking it, and we hate to think of what that was doing to their lungs.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Scars.
oh, terrible things. So, I mean, there is that real concern about quality control, especially in the illicit market.
Yes. And petroleum-based chemicals, nutrients, so to speak, they're maybe 50, 60 years old. They really manifested in the mid-50s, late 40s. To replace a lot of the organic-based growing that had happened for centuries past. And in my personal opinion, to bring a plant to true fruition, it needs that symbiotic relationship in the soil of the fungus and the root systems to allow the plant to decide what it wants to eat, not to force nutrients on it.
Now, you're raising another issue that I've heard, which is that those of us who grew up in the 60s and 70s, they say, oh, well, that's not your mother's marijuana anymore. This is more like some sort of super weird, strange new plant, unlike anything else ever seen on the planet. Is that true? Is there?
I think it's a double entendre, so to speak, a yes and no answer. The ability to grow the plant to fruition in a better way is definitely more capable nowadays. The amount of products they've come out with in grow stores, from enzymes to probiotics to mycorrhiza,
Oils also.
everything you can
Yeah.
think of under the spectrum to give people the option to grow a better plant. But many times when I was strain hunting, I had special requests to go back to the Columbia Gold or the Acapulco
Yeah.
Gold. So I was, searching for that Santa Marta Columbia Gold strain that, was perfect for the certain individual. And so I don't necessarily think that the plant has dramatically changed. I think that it's been brought to light considerably more. It's grown better due to the
It was
technologies.
just that Michigan green was always so bad. That was the stuff that you never wanted to have. Michigan, all the stuff that was out there wild just wasn't very good, I
And
guess.
all the material that was being imported from Mexico was ditchweed.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
because it was easy to harvest.
Yes, and it's traveled a long ways, and a lot of times it sat for a year or more, and
Uh,
and there was a lot of issues from what I've read. On top of the fact, if you're trying to take a sativa tropical-based strain and grow it in Michigan's climate, it's never going to come to fruition. One would rather look for a Hindu Kush or something that's a mountain-based strain with a very early harvest to hopefully work around Michigan's climactic challenges, we'll call it. And I think that really becomes the issue at hand is they're forcing people to do this in a basement with expensive light bills because of the fear of persecution.
yeah.
You can't do it out in the open with what nature provides, and there are strains that will perform in Michigan, particularly if one could have a climate-controlled environment, a greenhouse of some kind that they could supplement and manipulate the weather a little bit more. But everyone's from who I've talked to is just scared to death to have something out in plain sight. I've seen more helicopters in the last 4 years than I've ever seen in my life.
Oh, I know they go over my house all the time because I live near woods and they're constantly on the search for it. This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. We're talking with Lance Forsberg, who has been caught up in the problems with the Michigan medical marijuana law being in contradiction to or in opposition to the federal laws and getting caught in that web. One of the things I wanted to say, Lance, is that there is a level of hypocrisy. I'm somebody who has trained police for a number of years as part of the community policing movement, and there's a level of hypocrisy here when I know police officers myself who are marijuana users, and it's not the medical variety that they were always using. I had a criminal justice major who lived next door to me when I was much younger out in Williamston, and he went on to become a state police official. He used to grow a few plants in the backyard, and he came over one day and he said, do you think that one of the kids in the neighborhood is going to recognize what it is? He said, I think what I should do is, like those red balls on those paddles? I could hang some. Maybe they'd think it was tomato.
Lemon tree.
I said, why don't you just put up a big neon sign that says this is not marijuana? I mean, might as well. I mean, it grows wild out in half the places around the state anyhow, although I think the DEA's been busy ripping them out. I mean, there's a real hypocrisy here, isn't there?
Absolutely. I even in my networking, I ran into several retired police officials
Yeah.
whom were involved with this and saying that they felt that it was something that is allowed. Uh, it's such a dichotomy in the scene because you got Michigan telling you everything's going to be okay and this law is drafted, and then
Yeah.
you have thieves in the night, so to speak, kicking in doors. And my main question becomes, if they're really trying to stop it, why don't they start at the top and work their way down? Maybe start with licensing and regulatory affairs, stop the $10 million in licenses they issued last year. But instead, they're kicking
How
in.
could you mislead people into applying for a license, make that kind of money for the state, it goes into the state coffers, and then turn around and have people facing what you're facing?
And not having an entrapment case.
Yeah.
And they're kicking in people's doors. I mean, this is people's homes whom they are raiding and pillaging and finding any way they can to compromise these individuals.
One of my friends emailed me over the weekend, actually, Facebooked me over the weekend. Friends of hers, acquaintances of hers, had their door kicked in and the battering ram and the whole thing, and they had the wrong house.
Oh, goodness.
And the whole family is so traumatized that they're absolutely terrified. Their kids are just scared, and they're afraid to say anything about it because there is this sense now that you really don't want to get crosswise with the police and make yourself a target. So you
Yes.
just sort of take it. And I'm really concerned about that attitude because we need to kind of push back and make sure that we're not turning into this kind of rogue state. I keep trying to tell my students on campus, when was the last time you saw a ninja-clad police officer with a battering ram come into one of your fraternities or one of the dorms here on campus? Well, they never see that. And I said, well, does that mean that there's no drugs on campus? Well, no, that doesn't mean there's no drugs on campus. I said, well, then why not? There's a two-tiered policing. And some people run into the net and some people don't. I guess they decided that they really did want to target growers.
Yeah, I think it's just an easy target. There's a light bill, there's,
Ah,
several. Growing cannabis is not a grab and go operation. It's something that takes 6 to 9 months to get set up. It's
it's not easy.
perpetual. It's not easy at
High
all.
investment,
High investment.
materials. You just follow people home from the grow places.
Exactly. And you check out their light bill, and honestly, I've never worked so hard in my life. It was something that it's like having a newborn child. You always have to be on its time. It's not going to wait for you.
Yeah.
And so it's a plant that is trying to be propagated and grown in the worst of environments for changing seasons. And it's just real-time critical thinking on a nonstop basis. And so the thing I think, in my personal opinion, is cannabis users are nonviolent contributors to society.
Hmm.
9 times out of 10, there isn't going to be a gun waiting for them on the other side, like maybe a meth lab would have, or something of major consequence. And so we're what we assumed was a law-abiding citizen doing our part to contribute to society, having jobs, working, and then trying to do something like this to supplement because the state allowed us. This is at least my experience and a lot of the growers I know. And so these aren't hardened criminals. These are family members. These are people with ailments. These are a lot of people legitimately that are in need of help in some way, shape, or form, and putting themselves literally as lambs to the slaughter. It's not, a fly-by-night thing. Uh, and just ironically, it's a Schedule 1 drug, cocaine being a Schedule 2 drug. They're sending a message that cocaine is safer than
That's so
marijuana.
bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah, safe. It is safer.
And, honestly, if people are trying to commit
3,000
crime,
people a year. I mean, when you look at it, cigarettes kill about 300,000. Alcohol kills about 100,000. Cocaine and heroin together kills somewhere between 3,000 and 6,000. They're not too sure, but that's such a small number compared to those larger numbers for the legal drugs that are regulated. And marijuana, to the best of anybody's knowledge, has never really killed anybody.
that's what I've seen as well. They've tried to show that because someone was under the influence, it created this, but it's something that stays in your system for 2 weeks to a month, and they're never looking at the chemical analysis of how much.
Right.
It's always, well, there was marijuana in their system, there's cannabis in their system, therefore.
And that's one of the sadder realities as well, because I know in the years when I was watching what was happening with drug testing, which certainly turned out to look like a lot of crony capitalism, I think the drug testing businesses are really just for-profit businesses that don't seem to contribute much. Cocaine is gone in 24 to 48 hours out of a person's system, but cannabis can stay in there for 60 days. So more and more people are caught net than the people who are really dealing with drugs that are far more dangerous for them. So the users, I think, You know, the Mark A.R. Kleiman, who we brought in for a conference in community policing, is an expert in looking at the drug laws in this country. And one of the things that he said that was so counterproductive with the traditional policing system, where you start with the small person on the street and you turn them and you make them turn in anybody above them, and if you don't have anybody to turn in above you, you're kind of in big trouble.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he said basically all you're really doing, if you look at it from another perspective, is you're toughening the breed. You're getting the people out of the business who in the 70s were sort of your friendly hippies that were the college students. And it's the people who really are willing to use guns and all sorts of violence to maintain the drug trade. Those are the only ones left, because they're the ones that know that they're facing 20 or 30 years behind bars. They can't. So that's such a high risk business at that point in the illicit trade that it's toughening the breed. You end up with these predatory wolves. And I think the whole point of the Michigan medical marijuana law was to avoid letting that group take over, you know?
Absolutely.
And yet, if they're taking people like you, and you know, you're going to do 3 years in a federal prison with all the question marks about what that must be like coming up, I mean, that scares off the legitimate people.
Right. You know, you make a great point. When people ask me to describe what the experience is, I say it's like having a life insurance salesman from hell. You basically have to buy the insurance, and then they want 6 of your closest friends' names, or else the insurance becomes unaffordable.
Yes.
And so it's literally a entrapment system meets what I would basically just say is bullying. With our situation, there were 7 of us, and so the individual that actually rented the facilities, as you went back to say with Rico, they called him the central hub of conspiracy, the drug kingpin. This man had not done drugs in his life. He was somebody who was told this was a legitimate way to rent facilities to people in a safe manner, spent an obscene amount of money to secure and lock and fence and put security cameras, which were busted the night, so there was no footage, and then told that he is some way, some shape, or form a mafioso kingpin.
Right.
And none of us have any prior records. I mean, you're talking about 7 of the most upstanding citizens, to whose ever perspective. But that being said, no criminal history whatsoever.
Do you think, Lance, that take a look at Colorado? Are they going to be going through this too?
Oh, God.
You know, that's an interesting point. And when I got raided in my home, I asked 3 questions. I said, well, what about California and Colorado? And they said, well, this isn't California and Colorado. This is Michigan. Okay, fair enough. Well, what about the Holder memo? Eric Holder released a memo calling off federal watchdogs and under the Obama administration. And they said, well, you know, Obama's not our boss. We don't report to him. You want to change, you got it. I mean, just laughing jackals as they're destroying my life. And so then I said, this
So
is,
who do they work for?
you know, whoever they work for, other than money, there's just no one above them that's putting them in check. That's the real problem. They don't answer to anyone. It's these syndicated legal, quote unquote, entities that create an agency that is profiteering, in my opinion. There is nobody above them saying, hey, enough's enough. It's just several different agencies and acting on their own will and dictating the laws they see fit. You know, the last thing I said is, this is America, and the room went quiet.
What was the third question you asked them before I forget?
This is America?
Oh, that was
This
the
is
third
America?
question.
They didn't have a smart answer for that one.
This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. Years ago, Lance, I was at a conference in Chicago where U.S. Attorney at the time, Anton Valukas, and a group of other people out of the National Institute of Justice were educating law enforcement people here in the Midwest about how to use civil forfeiture. And they gave an example of one of the prosecutors did about a case that they had handled where a grandmother had had her home seized and sold because her grandson reportedly had purchased it with drug proceeds. He pointed out later that the grandson was found not guilty, but that didn't mean that Granny got her home back. And he talked about the fact that nobody got hurt in this kind of prosecution, and so he was urging everybody to embrace forfeiture because it had now pretty much turned DEA into an agency that no longer needed funding because the forfeiture money was coming in so thick and fast that they didn't have to worry about funding the agency from tax dollars anymore. And I was stunned sitting there in the audience and did put up my little hand and ask, what about Granny? Wasn't she hurt? And a momentary sort of cloud came across the man's face, and he said, well, I guess she did, but she should have known what her grandson was doing. And I thought, well, if he was found not guilty, are we sure that we know what her grandson was doing? I mean, this is the problem with forfeiture, is that you can have civil forfeiture where your property is confiscated and sold. And just because the underlying crime is you may be found not guilty doesn't mean you get your stuff back.
Absolutely. I was gutted clean, and uh, the things that I heard that night, I could never prove to anybody. They could hook me
Yeah,
up to a lie detector,
yeah.
but this is, my word versus theirs. But I did see my sister had gone to Ireland and got me a pewter ashtray, and it was a nice looking ashtray, but it wasn't silver or anything. Well, it was in an evidence bag, and I said, "Do you guys really need to take that? I mean, that's got some sentimental value to me." And the one officer looks at the other and says, "Is it a Waterford ashtray?" No, he can keep it.
Oh, they
Hmm.
are already knowing what it's going to.
Oh yeah, it's like Antiques Roadshow. I mean,
Ah.
they literally just are appraising things as they go and literally just drooling over their newfound stuff.
Oh, and they love trading the
It's like
cars.
shopping for him.
It is.
Yeah, very much so.
What wounds me is that Bob Trejanowitz and I ran the National Center for Community Policing, and one of our primary goals with that was to look at non-arrest strategies to solve problems in communities. Because we were seeing this prison building boom take place. And what we didn't want to have was community officers stationed in neighborhoods who simply increased the number of people going into our prison system. The goal was to look at ways that communities could come together and not just use the formal criminal justice system, but the informal system. You know, keeping an eye on kids, steering them in the right direction, sort of shaking your finger at people saying, don't do that anymore, rather than just throwing people in prison as a solution. Unfortunately, as the drug war heated up, they made arrest as the first priority for community policing and really changed the movement significantly. It changed and in my mind, corrupted it. And I watched that happen as the drug war heats up. We see these waves. And I think you're pointing out something that I think is really important to people. When the Michigan marijuana law first passed, I think everybody was optimistic that we were leading into this new enlightened era. Responsible people could start growing their own, form these new businesses. Business Insider continues to report on this as a great growth industry. But what we're seeing is this kind of undercurrent and backlash where people are paying a heavy price for believing that PR.
Yes, I mean, the day after I got raided, which it was December, I called up the power company because I was seeing, a few $100 bills. It was more than normal. And I said to him, I just got rated federally and I got another hefty light bill coming, electricity bill coming. I'm going to need some help with a payment plan or something. They said, sure, sounds good. Hung up the phone. The next day, my power got shut off. I lived in a home with no power
What? Your
through
home?
December, January, February. It got so cold in there from the walls getting cooled off that it was warmer outside most times. Now, the reason I bring this up is because it's not even the initial raid that is the punishment or the hard times. It's every day thereafter. They take all your stuff, your vehicle, your sustainability, any money they can find,
Yeah.
and then you still have to live. An individual still has to get up the next day and try to figure out what's going on, to eat, to get places, to try to work.
Let's talk a little bit about legal bills.
Oh my goodness. Just wiped everybody out. I filed for bankruptcy, several others as well. We were looking in the tens of thousands, anywhere from 30 to up to 100 and some $1,000 bills. It's interesting too because they open your bank
And you didn't go to
accounts.
trial.
No, no.
No.
In fact, I met with my probation officer and got put on drug testing before I was even arraigned. And then at arraignment, was told what I was facing. And this is after I already met with my probation officer, so guilty until proven otherwise, I guess. And then pre-sentencing and then sentencing. And so it's such a situation where uh, they have it to a science. They open up
Yeah.
your accounts, they look for your assets, and they decide then and there what is it going to cost you.
Uh, what was the maximum that they were threatening you with at one point?
Initially, it was 13 indictments, 59 to 160 years. I cannot tell anyone or describe to anyone the feeling I had after hearing that. I literally got sick for a week and was not able to even get out of bed. And when I say sick, couldn't keep anything down.
Right.
The anxiety, it felt like my heart was going to explode. It literally was like a death sentence, an end of life sentence. Thank goodness I had a 3-year-old daughter to be concerned with. But what I tell people is is my daughter got sentenced to 3 years without her father.
Right.
That's what's really going on here. After sleeping in a home with no power, if they want to feed and shelter me, God bless them. But there is a repercussion to the family, to the fact that I have a daughter to still take care of, and she is missing her father in some formative years. And so the sentence has really been passed on to her more than myself.
And you always have to worry about having that on your record, the felony
Absolutely.
conviction.
3
That is
felony
just a
convictions.
killer. We were talking over the weekend with some friends about how the restorative justice movement talks about graceful redemption, that when people come back, they should be given a second chance. Not in our society. It's
No.
very
None.
tough sell.
Absolutely
We're
not.
very punitive.
To explain this to anyone in a sentence or less would be impossible. To say, yeah, but I thought I was not breaking the law, they see 3 drug felonies. And the reason I say 3 and not 13 is because with the 13 indictments we all faced, we would have had to fight each indictment one after the other consecutively.
So not one trial.
Not
Oh,
one
no.
trial. And so even if we...
You could not have afforded that.
No, you can't. And on top of it, the only silver lining would be that we were found not guilty by a jury of 12.
Right.
But they pre-select the jury.
Yes.
They have it to just such a science that there is no way to beat these people. They have over a 95% conviction rate.
Right.
And so
Now, the one thing, though, that the public doesn't know about is that there is such a thing as jury nullification. And I think that's an underutilized tool that juries don't always realize. That when our country was founded, it wasn't just the idea that you had to apply the law. Juries could decide they didn't like the law either, and so they're just going to say, too bad, we're going to let the guy go. And juries don't realize they have that power. And I wonder if there's a sort of underground movement building now, because I think we're reaching some sort of critical mass in the culture, maybe where people are just saying enough.
I hope so. I truly hope so.
What was behind that movement? Jury nullification.
Jury nullification, it periodically surfaces.
There are
and there are
several
groups
movie
now-
stars and things that just were promoting that movement nationwide. I don't remember who was behind it.
There are plenty of situations where I think juries, would be well advised. The problem is that they're not allowed to be advised that that is within their purview. The courts have decided that they would be very rapidly out of business, I think, in a lot of cases, because there's quite a few cases where people say, well, I didn't like the law, but I had to follow what the law dictated. So they don't realize they have that power. They're not going to put the jury in jail.
Lance, do you think if you didn't have a young child, you would have
Fought it?
disappeared?
Oh.
That's a very
That's an interesting
a
question.
very real question, and honestly, that was my deciding factor to stick around. But Canada is not even becoming a safe haven so much anymore, from what I've heard. There's particular regions that could be, and so I was contemplating an exit strategy. But again, these people are the big bad wolf. They have control over everything. And so if I would have ran, I would have definitely seen 59 to 160 years.
Right, that's the problem.
So now the blessing is 3 years. The fact that I beat a 5-year minimum maximum, that's their gift to me. And so that is a tough question. But run to where?
Yeah.
Right?
It's harder nowadays.
Yeah, I don't think
It's harder to disappear and become anonymous.
Canada might just send you back.
Very real option. And the thing is once I was put on probation, I'm not allowed to leave the state. I actually wasn't even allowed to leave the area. And so if my card gets scanned somewhere, I'm going straight to prison. If I were to purchase alcohol anywhere, I'm going straight to prison. There is this looming proverbial carrot of death that is motivating one to not do anything but sit still.
Can you still use cannabis to treat your back? Or
No,
not?
absolutely not.
See, so then they
Absolutely
can't even
not.
use the medicine even though it's legal in the state.
Absolutely not.
See, that also doesn't make any
Makes
sense to me.
No?
I mean, I see all of these cases like, we have the famous Walmart case with the man with the brain tumor who gets caught with a dirty urine and, by drug testing at Walmart. All of a sudden he's out of a job. Well, how can you be out of a job for a legal drug that's legal in the state? I mean, there's these strange anomalies. And I'm also seeing that there's sort of this variation in prosecution around the state. People even who are thinking that they're following state law and who, perceive themselves as following state law are being brought up on state charges. And it seems to depend on what county you live in. I mean, I thought really, you talked about the Holder memo. And Holder was charged with trying to figure out exactly the relationship the federal government would have with these states as we see more and more of them. Now, it seems to me, they don't seem to be having too much difficulty dealing with gay marriage in some states. Why not just they still don't recognize it at the federal level, but they certainly don't intervene in the states. But what's happened is that it seems the federal government, in particular Attorney General Holder, is kind of inundated these days with scandals and questions on this decision has never come down. He's never clarified really what that means. There's apparently a bill, they were talking about it yesterday, 1523, that Dana Rohrabacher, one of the most conservative California representatives, has introduced, that said that it would preclude the federal government from prosecuting under in states where there is marijuana legalization laws under any of those cases. So if they could get that through, that would essentially, I would hope, if it were retroactive, help you. So there is some hope on the horizon.
Retroactively, anything that was passed would apply to me, I've been told. However, they make the rules. This is their world, and once you're playing their game, they set the rules. They can change the rules. And, I didn't see police coming through my door. I saw people with guns coming through my door.
Right.
So to me, it's very strange because I'm told certain things are okay, but then if somebody with a gun's telling me it's not, I'm going to believe them.
Right. Yeah.
So it's rogue cops. I hate to say it, but it's rogue agents that are dictating this on a micromanagement scale, and I'm a little leery, even if macro, the United States were to pass something, that it would even be enforced.
Well, that's worrisome as well. I know. I mean,
No one is risk taking them on, have they, DEA?
I think it's so difficult. I mean, I don't even know how you take them on.
Well, yeah, they don't worry about budget.
No, they don't have to worry about budget. They do seem. I mean, I met with DEA agents when in my previous life with the National Center, and I was a little uncomfortable with the sort of cowboy mentality that I perceived among some of these. A very macho outfit. I mean, very much that they were their own rulers, and they made me uncomfortable. And I was unhappy to see them take such an interest in taking community policing on as sort of the way to get all this information out of communities, because they, were encouraging people to talk to the local police officer. So it's led to this backlash where now in communities you're not supposed to snitch about anything, even if somebody gets killed. We seem to be moving in two directions at the same time. This sort of enlightenment strain where you think things are getting better, but then there's this really repressive side of it. We now have 2.3 million people behind bars, a higher rate of incarceration than any other country on the face of the planet. We streaked by South Africa and Russia long ago. I mean, and it's a huge industry. And I don't think people realize how expensive it is to keep. What is the point of keeping you behind bars for 3 years?
That's a great question, other than profiteering in some way, shape, or form. I mean, it's the justification, the means to the end for what they did. It's a gambit, that you got the enforcement agents that used all these things and spent money, and so if they get the prosecution, it justifies a lot of what they've done, in conjunction with the fact that turn of the century there was maybe 20,000 federal prison inmates. Now there's over 200,000, and so new facilities are being built, and it's creating just a whole nother profiteering. And something I just want to point out is my story is being told primarily because the main thing I was told was to be quiet about it. And I am apprehensive to tell the story, but I don't want any of my fellow citizens to not understand what it means to be in this shade of gray, so to speak. The reason most people aren't hearing about this is because they're scared to tell their story.
Yeah.
Everybody is told by these people that if you speak out, if it just gets worse, if you do anything to let people know what happened. And so that's why I use the term thieves in the night, because it's something where they don't want it to be known. And again, why would that be? And why are they not going to where the federal government could make these stands on a larger scale with licensing and regulatory affairs, or with putting out a public service announcement saying, hey, don't do this. Instead, it's be quiet. It's perfectly psychological for an abuser's role, as far as I'm concerned.
I give you credit, Lance. You are incredibly brave to do this.
Yeah, I'd be scared to do what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, but I do think it's such an important story for people to understand, because families across the country will be devastated by this. I mean, it happens in secret because people are afraid to speak out, or they're discredited because now they're a felon. You're a convicted felon, so therefore somehow we're not supposed to listen to your story or not pay attention.
This is why we fought the Cold War against Russia.
Right, yeah. We have to be very careful about the police powers in our country, and I think yours is a prime case that makes us ever vigilant. And I thank you so much for coming in, and especially since I know with a 3-year-old daughter and not too many nights left before you won't be able to see her, and I really appreciate you taking the time and coming to talk with us.
She's the light of my world, and if I can make it better tomorrow for her, I'll pay the price today.
Thank you so much. That has been our talk this evening with Lance Forsberg. We will not be on next Monday night. This is Lansing Online News Radio. Happy Memorial Day next Monday, and we will be seeing you in 2 weeks. Thank you very much. I can't believe what happens. Let me save this because here's the one that after I turn it off, it continues